Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, Canada's federal election is next week, and one topic in particular has been making a surprising amount of conversation. A full face veil, or the Niqab, and whether or not it can be worn during citizenship ceremonies. So how did this become a hot button election issue? It's good to have Malika Valau, our digital producer, back.
Thanks.
Putting her to work immediately.
Exactly.
What's on your laptop?
Yes, and it's definitely worked because there are a lot of people talking about this. So on the one hand, you have some people saying that this issue, the Niqab, the full face veil in Canada, is being used by the ruling Conservative Party to make gains. You see a picture here. This is Mo, who tweets in. He shows us the party's website with a quote from Prime Minister Stephen Harper, who says, "That's not our Canada," in reference to the Niqab. And whether or not it's working is something people are discussing. This is Carly on Twitter, and she says, "I'm not sure if I'm voting for Harper, but I am all for that Niqab ban." So we want to discuss this with your help. You can tweet us your thoughts with hashtag AJStream.
Hi there, my name is Rob Hubert. I'm at the University of Calgary, up in Calgary, Canada, and I'm in the stream.
In just a few days, Canadians head to the polls to select a new government in what is being described as one of the most important elections in recent years. The race has been very close between the country's three biggest parties, the ruling Conservatives, the Liberals and the New Democrats. Most Canadians say the economy is their biggest priority. Low oil prices have made the Canadian dollar one of the worst performing currencies in the world over the past year. There has been a lot of talk about the struggling economy, but Canadians say a number of other issues like the environment, healthcare, First Nations and women's issues are not getting the attention they deserve. One issue that's getting a lot of press, though, is the Niqab. Back in 2011, the Canadian government, led by Prime Minister Stephen Harper, introduced a Niqab ban for citizenship ceremonies. Earlier this year, one woman, Zunera Ishaq, sued the government, claiming the ban violated her rights, even though she won the case and the appeal that followed and got her Canadian citizenship. The government is not giving up. They want to take the fight to the Supreme Court, and in the meantime, they are talking about this on the campaign trail. Harper supporters claim this is about standing up for Canadian values and that the Niqab, and I'm going to quote him here, is rooted in a culture that is anti-women, end of quote. But his critics say he's encouraging fear and suspicion of Muslims and distracting voters from the real issues facing the country. To help us talk about all of this, we're joined by Zainab bint Yunus. She's a writer and blogger under the name The Salafi Feminist. Margaret Wente is a columnist with the Globe and Mail newspaper. Shireen Ahmed is a sports activist and writer on the intersections of politics, sport and feminism. And Jonathan Lidke is the chief political reporter at the Windsor Independent newspaper. So good to have you all here. Margaret, I'm going to put you and Zainab up in a box so we can both see you here. So Margaret, when you see Zainab, what do you see?
It's hard to see her, actually. And I think I'm a very typical Canadian in this respect, in that the Niqab makes me very, very uneasy. I have an almost visceral response to it. And the trouble is, I can't see Zainab behind the veil. All I see is the veil itself. And the messages it sends, because of the heavy symbolism that it comes with, the messages that it sends to me and to most Canadians are deeply negative. And they have nothing to do with racism or discrimination against Muslims. I believe it's that the veil itself is a symbol of women's oppression.
Zainab.
All right, so see, I would combat that by saying, what if we just put the camera off and we were just talking on the phone? Obviously, I understand the visible symbolism, which I find very intriguing, and I believe that it's heavily related to decades, if not centuries, of ingrained stereotypes about the veil, about Muslims, about Muslim women, about our place in society, as it were, and how that's viewed by those who are not Muslim or are not part of the not society, I should say, part of the faith. or cultures wherein it's a lot more common to see. Simply because I believe firmly from my perspective, from the perspective of Muslim women I know, my friends who do wear the niqab as well, and we come, by the way, from many very different backgrounds. I mean, let me just throw this question at you. What do you think my ethnic background is from? And do you think that I'm wearing the veil, wearing the niqab as part of a reflection of my, my ingrained culture?
Let's go with one question at a time. So your ethnic background, Margaret, what would you guess?
All right, what do you think? Throw it at me.
I have no idea. I've talked to a lot of niqabi women. I know they're from every background, including Canadian. I know women who wear the niqab by choice. I know that it's often a personal choice, free choice, and all of that. And I've had wonderful conversations. However, if you get away from the wonderful individuals, you have to understand the symbolism of the niqab and why it's so negative for so many people. And it is that, as a matter of fact, it is associated with oppression of women and medieval religious behaviors in many parts of the world.
Margaret, I'm going
I would say that the symbolism
like to
is
respond
something
to what
that
Margaret's been saying.
Zainab, hold tight a minute so we can bring Shireen
I'm a
in.
typical
Shireen, go ahead.
Canadian. I'm actually typical Canadian, and a lot of
I was
typical
just gonna say,
Canadians
I'm
I know
third-generation
are
Canadian.
really okay with being and supporting rights that are enshrined in the Charter of a woman practicing her faith. So when I see Zainab, I actually someone who lives in a country who is supported by constitutional freedoms to practice her religion the way she sees fit. Now, these ideas of what niqab represents and for people's personal opinions of oppression, I don't feel that way, and a lot of people I communicate with, even now in the sports journalism world, don't feel that way. So, I mean, the group that Margaret associates with and affiliates with, other than those wonderful conversations with selective niqabis, I'm sorry, that's not the Canada that I know.
Okay, Shireen, I think Shireen raises a very important point. And that is, there's a big distinction between banning the niqab and disliking it. And
absolutely,
to dislike
and I think that
to dislike it is not to say we should ban it.
Where do you fall? Where do you think
Where
do you think? I mean, there've been polls on this, Margaret. So are people in Canada into not liking the niqab, or are they wanting to ban the niqab? Where are we with this?
Okay, well, let me just throw out a couple of general statistics, because this is very important. And it's not just sort of reactionaries who dislike the niqab intensely. It's a majority of Canadians, probably 3/4 of Canadians, agree with the government on some form of niqab ban, especially in citizenship ceremonies, which is where you show allegiance to your country.
All right.
And Canadians see the niqab as a rejection of Canadian values.
All right.
Do you remember, Margaret, do you remember years back when...
So Zainab and Shireen and Jonathan, just hold tight for me a moment, because this conversation is also going on online. Malika, what do you have?
Exactly, and there is an interesting perspective here from Michael. And Zainab, I'll give this to you. This is on Twitter, and he says, for me personally, the full niqab is a sign that the wearer does not wish to facially engage with broader society. And there are others like him online who are saying the same thing. So what do you say to that criticism?
I would say that's an assumption on your part, and not to be rude, but we all know what making assumptions does to you and me. And this is where I really think that people need to get out of this insistence that, well, this is how I feel and that's it. Well, no, it's not. Sometimes you have to make an effort. I personally make an effort every day when I go out of the house. I do engage. I go to the public library. I go to my daughter's school. I go to the mall. I engage with my neighbors on a regular basis, and niqab is not always the focal point of that discussion or lack
do you
of discussion.
notice anyone behaving to you in a... It's difficult because will you notice anyone behaving to you in a way where they feel like they can't connect or can't engage? You didn't always wear the niqab, so you've got a sense of before you wore it and after you wore it. Are people exactly the same to you?
Yes, actually, if anything, I would say that with niqab, I've had more people, more Canadians, and I love this about where I live, in particular the West
Yeah.
Coast and BC, that people will make an effort to get past their discomfort. They will actually come up to me and say, you know, excuse me, I hope you don't mind me asking a few questions. This is something that I've heard about the niqab or read about it. I'd like to know about it. What's your perspective? And I think that's awesome. Because it goes to show that there's still intelligent Canadians out there who aren't insistent on living within their little bubble and saying, well, you know, I feel uncomfortable about it and that's that. These are the people whom I admire, who make a point of going out of their comfort zones, who are who are brave enough
Majority or
to
minority?
take that effort.
Zainab,
To make that effort.
most people go out of their comfort zones to talk to you and they're happy.
Sorry?
Majority or minority?
I would say the majority of people. I have had a handful of incidents where I would say they were negative or they started off negative, but as soon as I started responding, the tone of the conversation changed very quickly. Because you see, it's not just about the visual symbolism of the niqab, thinking that, oh, this woman's oppressed. There's a lot of other assumptions out there, such as, oh, well, you're not Canadian. Oh, you must not speak English. Oh, you must not be this, that, and the other. And then I'll tell people I'm third generation Canadian, and a lot of times.
So you've got a little
I had a
taste.
British woman come to me actually and say, in Canada we don't do this here, you know.
Oh, interesting.
And you don't have to do this anymore. And I was like, I know, I grew up here. Where are you from? And she's like, well, England. And I was like, guess what? I'm more Canadian than you are.
All right, so everybody's had a little taste here of the debate that's going on in Canada around the niqab. And then you put it into election politics, and then what happens?
Right. Well, Jonathan, as you can see, of course, there is a debate there, and it's one that a lot of people want to talk about. But then what that has to do with the election is something that our video commenter brings up. This is Subia, so I want you to have a listen to what she had to say.
I think Stephen Harper is using the niqab as a re-election strategy. He's trying to appeal to any sort of anti-Muslim sentiment that may exist within Canada. I also don't think it's a coincidence that this started happening shortly after he hired Linton Crosby for to manage his campaign, and this is a man who's been known to use xenophobia and racism to help other politicians around the world get elected.
So, Jonathan, she mentioned the name Linton Crosby, and all four of our guests nodded their heads. So, who is that? Why is that important, and what does that have to do with this election?
Well, Linton Crosby is an Australian political strategist, and he has had great success in exploiting really significant wedge issues in Australia and in the UK. He was with Tony Blair as well. What he really, it's been called that he throws a dead cat on the table, which allows to distract a conversation that is necessarily, I could say, negative on a campaign. So just before Linton showed up in Canada and the conversation shifted to him, Harper was looking really poor in the polls. He was going down. There were a lot of bozo eruptions, as they've been called in Canada, where there were candidates who have been dropping left, right, and center. Crosby entered the scene, and then what happened very quickly is we're talking about niqabs, and it's become this conversation, and we're 2 weeks later.
Jonathan, I wonder if I can make a few...
Please.
Go ahead, Margaret.
Yes. Let me make a couple of quick points. First of all, Linton Crosby is not quite as powerful as he has been made out to be. Secondly, the niqab debate is not new with this election. It goes back a long way. And
it goes
has
back
been...
to 2011, but it's been really
2011.
pushed.
It's been very hot, it's been very hot, especially in Quebec, where the Liberal Party, which is now in power in Quebec, that's the French-Canadian province of Canada, and now has legislation in the works which is backed by all the parties, which would ban the niqab in other circumstances as well. It would ban the niqab in
sure. Margaret, we talked about this in Quebec a little while ago on the stream, but I want to bring us back to now, because we are on a lead up to an election, and out of all of the issues that Canada could be talking about, this is your Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, right here. I was proud to take this stand in last Thursday's debate. I will never tell my young daughter that a woman should cover her face because she's a woman. that's not our Canada. Now, if that
Well,
isn't a bit of
that's not Stephen
electioneering...
Harper's Canada. That's the Conservative Canada.
Right.
It's definitely not my Canada.
Right.
It's not a Canada reflected by millions of people. And Margaret talked about statistics that she has. Well, I have a whole bunch of statistics too.
Yeah.
And let's remember, polls are extremely relative. The polls that Harper is citing are funded by the Conservative Party of Canada. I mean, if you poll the New Democratic Party, I'm sure they'll pull out polls that say they're ahead in certain ridings. So let's keep this in perspective.
Shireen, if you could unpack this a little bit.
Instead of focusing on over 1,000 missing and murdered Indigenous women in this country that the United Nations has called a crisis, without talking about poverty-stricken children that live in Toronto. It's a crisis in the city, for one, and the biggest city in this country. There are so many issues that require so much more attention from the government. In destruction of environmental policies, the refugee crisis in the world that Canada has simply sat back and watched, and we know the debacle that's happened. I don't know if the viewers internationally know this, but Mr. Harper's been accused of single-handedly personally shutting the door on refugee applications.
Shireen is right. Shireen is right that Mr. Harper, the Conservative leader, is playing election politics with this issue. There's no question about that. However, this issue, it's almost entirely symbolic. Very few women in this country actually wear niqab. But this is an ongoing conversation that we have in Canada and will continue to have in Canada about symbols and identity.
I have is why. I don't believe personally. I've grown up in Canada my entire life, and my mom was at one point the only woman on Vancouver Island to wear the niqab, and for many years, may I add. And I started wearing the niqab when I was 17. Most people throughout my entire life do not care. The reason that these polls are coming up and people are saying anything is because there's been a concerted agenda to bring it up. Where you focus the spotlight is where people will look. Now, if we put the spotlight on those First Nations women, maybe the rest of the country would have something to say about it and start caring. We're so focused.
Well, you can't. Unfortunately,
on
you can't
this
get away from the
niqab,
fact.
But people, like the people who were saying, "Well, I feel uncomfortable about it," there's no effort made to unpack that discomfort.
I'm smelling something. I think, Jonathan, that might be the smell of a dead cat. Is this what you're talking about here? That we're just a few days before the Canadian election, and we're discussing the press talking about, and people in Canada talking about the niqab that probably only a few hundred people actually wear. But I'm also, I can show you 10 headlines here all saying the same thing. Hold tight for a moment, Margaret. Malika, what do you have?
Well, it's actually an answer to that question that Zainab asked, the why. This is Mubin on Twitter, and he says, just what you said, Femi, basically the perfect wedge issue is why. And he says it's to distract away from the failures of the Prime Minister. Another person weighs in saying that this is pitting Canadians against one another. It's immigrants against old stock Canadian, quote unquote, and that's a term that the Prime Minister used in a debate in September. So you have the reasonings from people and what they believe there, Jonathan, but I'm wondering whether or not this is actually working. What do the poll numbers say? How does that relate to whether or not there will be results come election time?
Well, I mean, we've been talking about this. The polls, they go up and they go down. What I know is that there's a lot of conversation about this. As we said, the dead cat is on the table, so to speak. There's media that we're talking about this right now. But that's not to say that the very serious issues haven't been discussed at all during this election. It's been 11 weeks, and we've only been talking about the niqab, quite honestly, for about 2.5 to 3 weeks. We had lots of debates. There was a foreign policy debate that they had. There's domestic issues. We talked about the economy. Right now, though, in the final lead up to the election, we are talking about the niqab, but it's not overwhelmingly that every story is about this. And look, I mean, I'm a white male who doesn't wear a niqab. I'm about as far removed from it as affecting me directly. But for me, it comes down to just a matter of freedom to practice your religion. I get really concerned when the government starts to talk about how a religion should be dictated, what you should do as your religious adherence. And to me, if someone feels that wearing a niqab is part of their religion, the government has no place to say yes or no. It just comes down to if we can verify the security, which is really what this issue is all about. Can we tell that this is the person who's actually saying that they are becoming Canadian citizen when they take the oath, and that has been achieved. They show their veil in private before the oath, and then when they take the oath, they can have their niqab, and I don't see an issue whatsoever.
I mean, this is, for somebody, I was born and raised in Canada. I mean, you want to talk about a typical Canadian? I'm bilingual, fluently in French and English, multilingual actually. I played ice hockey as a child, and I just talked about poutine. So, I mean, I'm pretty much, other than what I look like, the stereotype of a Canadian. Now, let's be very clear about something. This issue is also, for me, a very feminist issue. This is a conservative government dictating what a woman should wear. This is not about an interpretation of someone's religion or culture. It is really about white privileged men dictating to women, infringing on their bodily autonomy, what they can wear. And this is 2015. It's appalling.
Shaheen,
and
I
I'm
would
just going
like
to bring
to
up
point
really
out,
quickly a quote that I love
I would like
from
to add
just one
that
sec, Margaret.
there's
A quote from Arundhati Roy talking about, this is similar because Margaret mentioned Quebec. Now, the ban in France, if people aren't familiar, there's a Niqab ban in full-fledged force. Now, the quote is very specifically, and I'll paraphrase here, coercing a woman out of a niqab or burqa is as dangerous as coercing her into one. It's about violence, and that violence is dangerous precedent to set for this country, particularly one that the Supreme Court of Canada has already established is that woman's right.
Shireen?
I wonder what to make of the fact then that every feminist in Quebec, and every political leader, no matter what their gender, no matter what their party, advocates some restrictions on the niqab in public. I wonder what to make of Cairo University, which is banned the niqab among girls.
So ladies, Shireen, hold tight. Shireen, hold tight. Jonathan, hold tight. Zainab, hold tight for a moment. Shireen, give me a moment, because Shireen,
we can pick up people from there. That's
Shireen can't hear me. Oh, Shireen's ignoring me. All right, Shireen, allow Margaret to respond to you, so then I can hear both of you. Go ahead, Margaret, briefly.
There are niqab debates everywhere, all around the world, including Cairo, where Cairo University has banned the niqab among female professors because, I guess they've decided that that's the legitimate thing to do. In the province of Quebec, which is in every way extremely liberal, all the leading feminist groups are anti-niqab in certain occasions, not all the time, but under certain circumstances. Niqab debates are happening all over Europe. You cannot simply dismiss everyone who objects to the niqab as a racist or a bigot or anti-Muslim.
Not at all, but
that's just to demonize people.
No, but can I say that they're anti-Canadian if they're actually going against what's enshrined in the Charter
Shireen, hold tight for a minute because I want to hear Zainab just very briefly.
I'm not going to call them xenophobic
and
or
Zainab?
racist if that offends them.
Shireen, allow the woman who's actually wearing the niqab to actually respond. Shireen, give me a moment.
Every feminist in Quebec is anti-niqab. That is simply not true, and there are coalitions
Absolutely,
in
and I agree,
solidarity
because
with
have
them.
you gone and
It's not
spoken
true.
to every feminist in Quebec? You say from every feminist to every feminist group. Well, what about Muslim women who identify as feminists, such as myself? And, talking about banning the niqab under certain circumstances, don't you think that's an unfeminist move? Because that's actually restricting women, those women, such as myself, for example, who might feel that they are less inclined to access certain social services, who are less inclined to go pursue a post-secondary education because this is the discrimination they're facing. And as a matter of principle, myself, I believe that I believe one of the suggestions was, banning the niqab in public service buildings or social service buildings, such as healthcare. You are now going to tell a woman, because you cover your face and you make me uncomfortable, I'm going to tell you that you are now obligated to remove this piece of cloth that is not physically harming anybody, but I'm going to do that and therefore make you more vulnerable to reduced health care. Forget that. When we engender attitudes like this, then there are cases, put the niqab aside, where there's already racism and discrimination against First Nations individuals who try to access health care.
All right, guess we're almost at the end of this part of the show. So Zainab and Margaret and Shireen and Jonathan, just give me a moment, because we don't want to crash into the end of the show, and then I'm going to take you all to the post-show, because we've still got a lot of debating to do. Malika, what do you have?
This is one sentiment that actually a lot of people seem to be sharing with the stream right now. This is Smith, who writes in, there are less than 300 people wearing niqab in Canada. There are 10,000 who want good, secure jobs. And there are other people saying that there are other issues that we should be looking at.
Jonathan, this is really interesting from a political perspective. Do you think there's somebody sitting there politically working for the Conservative Party thinking this is actually a good plan, this is going to take us through? Or is it just taking advantage of the circumstances of the time? What do you think?
Well, I mean, it's a new topic right now in the past 2 weeks, but this is a topic that goes back to at least 2011 in Canadian politics. It's not a new one. As Margaret says, there are overwhelmingly a lot of Canadians do support this, but I think that there is a bit of, I wouldn't call it a misinformation campaign, but I know that in my conversations with a lot of people, it's that security objective that people are really concerned about. The Canadian values one comes up often, but it's really just the security one. And once you explain, no, we do verify who they are,
all right.
the
Jonathan
whole conversation
Leckie
sort of ends.
is the chief political reporter for the Windsor Independent newspaper. We still have Shireen Ahmed, Margaret Wente and Zainab bin Yunus. We're taking them to the post show. Stream.aljazeera.com. Thanks for watching. Hello, this is the Streams Online Post Show. We've been talking about the Niqab debate in Canada, why of all of the different issues that Canadians say are important on the lead up to elections, this one has been getting a lot of attention. You've been hearing our guests debating it. Meanwhile, Malika's been watching the debate online. What do you have?
Exactly. This is a video comment sent to the stream from Frank Graves. And I want to play this for all of you. Margaret, I'll get your thoughts on what he says. And he's looking at why this is an issue. It's something that we touched on earlier, but he has some thoughts on it. So have a listen.
Canadian election that was supposed to be all about the economy became all about the Niqab. Many would justifiably say this was an unnecessary distraction, part of dog whistle politics, and something which would have a corrosive impact on what has been a very harmonious society in the past. We think, however, it has triggered a broader values debate, and we believe that this may have the ironic impact of awakening the progressive majority in Canada in this election.
So Margaret, what impact do you think the Niqab debate will have on the election?
I think it is just one issue among many. People are not voting on the Niqab issue. It's just one factor, but I don't know anyone who has changed their vote because of the Niqab. I will say this, that despite all the debate and heated debate over this, Canada is still the most accepting and tolerant and warmest towards immigrants and newcomers of any country in the world. And we're the biggest immigrant accepting nation, and we're the nation where immigration is the most successful. And I would defy anybody to look around the world and find a place where it's working better than in Canada.
Jonathan, when Margaret was saying people aren't going to change their vote on this issue, why are politicians spending so much time talking about it then?
Well, they don't have to talk about the other stuff that's going on. It's a very useful conversation. You can use it to distract from poor politics that are going on. But again, I wouldn't say that this is what the politicians are talking about over and over again. I think we're in a bit of a media echo chamber here where it goes back and forth. And, even through panels like this.
Yeah. If, Zainab, you had your way, what would be the top issue that should decide the upcoming election?
I would say amongst the top issues, it should be the economy, education, the state of our social welfare programs, our healthcare. I was quoted a figure, I don't know how accurate this is, that Stephen Harper spent $300,000 trying to take Zunera Ishaq to court and have her prohibited from wearing the niqab during the citizenship ceremony. How ridiculous is that when BC is facing a nursing shortage? How ridiculous is that when we have violence against women is extremely high, all kinds of violence? When we look at the money that Stephen Harper took out of our social welfare programs, do you know how many women and children and other vulnerable individuals were placed at risk because shelters were closed? All right, like, all those things matter to me as a woman, as a feminist, as a Canadian, a hell of a lot more than whether I and like a few hundred other women in this country are wearing this niqab. The lives of individuals are being impacted. There are people whose access to medical care is compromised, is non-existent for some. Their lives are in danger. The First Nations women who have been murdered and missing for years now. All right, why is it that their lives, human lives, don't matter as much as a piece of cloth does? All right. On top of that, I would actually like to bring up the issue of Canadian culture. All right. You were hearing about Canadian values, Canadian culture. What is Canadian culture? Is it Judeo-Christian? Is it secular? Is it white? Or is it First Nations? Because I think if we want to talk about Canadian culture, let's go to the First Nations to whom this country belongs, and let's see what they think about it. Because if anybody has the right to talk about Canadian culture, it's them. It's not all of us, whether white or otherwise, who are basically immigrants to this country, who are colonizers and settlers in this country. That does not belong to us. We want to talk about Canadian culture and values. Let's talk about the lives of those whom we ignore.
Arguing very clearly, fan leaders saying that their election priorities have not been addressed by any of the leaders during this election campaign. And that's a huge problem. To echo what Zainab said, that's exactly true. There's so many communities whose priorities and needs are getting looked over because of an issue that may be great for media and for clicks on the computer, but it's not what this country needs to be talking about right now. And Margaret said that this country is great at hosting immigrants, et-cetera. I worked frontline in a settlement agency for 5 years, starting 2009. That is simply not what it used to be. The Citizenship and Immigration Canada was completely dismantled. $55 million were cut while I was working there front line. Canada used to be a bastion of welcoming. It has not been like that since the Harper
Let me just interrupt,
taken office.
if I may.
So we can certainly laud the accomplishments of the government from decades past. That is not the reality.
We are the greatest immigration accepting nation in the world. We accept more immigrants and refugees every year, 300,000 per capita, than anybody. You can't say we don't welcome immigrants. It's just not true. I would say that principally this election, I think this has been a very good election campaign with 3 very interesting and very highly contrasting candidates for Prime Minister. We have a highly functional democracy in this country, robust debate, as you can see here. And, we fight with words instead of with guns, which I think is enormously
and also
positive.
Taxpayer money.
There's a reason that so many people want to come here from other parts of the world. I think this election is primarily a referendum on the leadership of the 3 candidates. And we may well find that the country is pretty tired of the current Prime Minister, who's been around for a long time. We'll see. But I think there is no reason to be cynical about this election and every reason to celebrate democracy at its most high functioning.
I think there is a reason to be cynical because when you look at the people who voted Harper in to begin with and everything that Harper's done during that time.
Shireen
and
Zainab,
Bill C-51.
I love listening to your beautiful voices. I'm going to ask you just to take a breath for a moment.
All right.
It sounds like an avant-garde album that we're making. Take a breath for a moment so I can bring in Malika.
Well, this is actually picking up on something you said, Margaret, that there is a reason that so many people want to come to Canada. And this is an issue that comes up whenever the stream does a Canada show. And people say that reason is Canadian values. So when we're talking about the Niqab issue, there are people online who say it goes against Canadian values to ban it. It's an appeal to the basest instinct. So I want to give this last comment from the community to you, Jonathan. This is Kay, who wrote to us on Facebook saying the Canadian way is to build an environment in which women may choose their own path, not have it legislated, which in Harper's world will promptly lead to punishment. So that's her view of those Canadian values. What are they to you?
Well, I would agree with that up until the punishment bit there. But I mean, Canadian values, it's, respect for one another, the right to practice your religion how you want to, freedom of speech. Some of your stereotypical ones come up as peacekeeping and not policing. But again, I'll go back to, as I said before, for me, the Niqab debate is based, this is a religious right, and the government shouldn't be trying to dictate how someone practices religion.
All right, so guests, this is going to be very challenging for you. You have an assignment. I want you to tell the world in a sentence each, without interrupting each other, okay, what this Niqab debate at this time of year for Canada says about Canada. You got the rules, okay? A sentence without interrupting. Margaret.
Yeah, it says we like to talk and debate, and our quarrels don't get too much more serious than that. This is really a clash of 2 sets of fundamental values: the right of people to practice their religion as they see fit, and the unease that people have with something that symbolizes the oppression of women.
Very good. Shireen, your sentence is what? What does this tell us about Canada?
misplaced priority to discuss this, but overall, fabulous country, amazing people, and yeah, just the discussion has gone astray.
Jonathan?
I think it just shows that we are not one homogenous group of people who all agree the same thing. Clearly, there's a lot of varying opinions, regardless of what polls show. But we have a very healthy democracy, and the fact that we can have these conversations, it's a good thing.
Zainab?
I'm going to be cynical and say that unfortunately for me, the niqab debate at this time of year, in this context, shows me how much Canada has changed since I was younger, and it hasn't changed for the better. In so many aspects, it's gotten worse, and it makes me very sad that we value, once again, discussion, constant discussion on a piece of cloth over the lives of human beings living in this country who deserve our attention and our taxpayers' money.
All right, so Zainab, Margaret, Shireen and Jonathan, the mark of a good conversation is that I'm always reluctant to wind it up. I am reluctantly winding you up. Good luck with the elections. Thank you so much for joining us here on the stream today. Take care, everybody.